We've got some breaking news. 2 U.S. troops and 1 civilian interpreter were just killed while conducting partnered operations against ISIS. Take a look.
2 U.S. soldiers and a civilian interpreter killed in an attack in central Syria earlier today. 3 others were wounded. The Pentagon says they were killed in an ambush by a single ISIS gunman. Syria's national news agency says the group came under fire while on a joint patrol with Syrian forces. CNN correspondent Julia Benbrook is at the White House for us. Julia, what are we hearing from U.S. officials, including the president?
Well, President Donald Trump spoke with reporters here at the White House just over an hour ago now as he left to go to Baltimore. He didn't speak with us for long, but his comments focused in on this attack in Syria. He said that he was mourning the lives lost. That includes 2 U.S. Army soldiers, as well as 1 civilian interpreter. There were 3 others wounded. He said he's thinking of them as well and that they are doing well. He called this attack an ambush. He said that it was an ISIS attack both on the United States and on Syria. He promised further action.
When President Trump heard about the attacks, he was devastated. This is what he said.
We will retaliate. This was an ISIS attack on us and Syria. And again, we mourn the loss and we pray for them and their parents and their loved ones. Very, very sad.
I know that when Americans see this video, they're going to be questioning what we were doing there. In order for us to be free, as we are in this country, we have to conduct these partnered operations all over the world. So as we speak, as I record this video right now, there are partnered operations happening all over the world. And the reason for these operations is that we are going after a common enemy. So us and our partners and our partner nations are going after a common enemy. And that ensures us that those enemies never make it to our homeland. When I was in the Marine Corps, I had the privilege of conducting some of these partnered operations with Colombian Special Forces. That was when they were still going after the FARC. And I can tell you none of those operations were in the news, and they weren't going to make the news either, just like this operation in Syria and many others that are happening all over the world. Now, here's a little more detail on how the troops were killed.
According to Syria's official national news agency, this attack took place as U.S. soldiers were on a joint patrol with Syrian forces, and that U.S. helicopters intervened to help evacuate the wounded. I also want to pull up a post from Sean Purnell. He is the chief spokesman at the Pentagon. He offered some more details. He said this, quote, "The attack occurred as the soldiers were conducting a key leader engagement. Their mission was in support of ongoing counter-ISIS, counter-terrorism operations in the region. The soldiers' names, as well as identifying information about their units, are being withheld until 24 hours after the next of kin notification. This attack is currently under active investigation."
This whole situation is unfortunate, and my thoughts and prayers go out to the families of these service members that were killed. But one thing I will say is that President Trump is unpredictable with a lot of what he says and does here in the United States. But one thing that I could tell you with certainty is that the retaliation, the payback for losing these service members overseas is going to be devastating to ISIS. It is going to be an overwhelming response to the death of these service members. And here's what the Secretary of War had to say.
Now, in another post, the Secretary of Defense said that the attacker was killed by partner forces, and he went on to say this, quote, "Let it be known, if you target Americans anywhere in the world, you will spend the rest of your brief, anxious life knowing the United States will hunt you, find you, and ruthlessly kill you."
You know, I'll be honest with you, if I was one of these terrorist organizations like ISIS or any other terrorist organization, Hamas, Al-Shabaab, I'd be very hesitant to strike any U.S. interest or attack any country that has American citizens in it. Because you know that the response to the death of any American, whether it's U.S. troops or civilians abroad, is going to be overwhelming. I would take a break for right now, at least until President Trump gets out of office. And let's go ahead and move on to our next topic, which is the massive scandal that's happening in Minnesota. It seems like every day that passes, Tim Walz, the governor, looks more guilty. And it's not just him. It appears to be a lot of other people that were involved in this. Take a listen.
These are federally funded programs. They happen in every U.S. state. What happened here in Minnesota that allowed this fraud to materialize, to metastasize?
It appears that the people at the highest levels of responsibility in the government of the state of Minnesota looked the other way.
And if you're asking yourself, well, why did they look the other way? Well, the answer to that is simple: for votes. Remember, the largest Somali population is in Minnesota. 80,000 Somalis. 95% of them are U.S. citizens. That means they can vote. It is in the best interest of every politician to ensure that a certain number of the population stays in that welfare state. In this case, it's the Somalis. Remember, 42% of Somalis are on welfare, are on SNAP. And if you take that away from them, then you're in danger of losing the vote. Now, remember, there's only 80,000 Somalis in Minnesota. The population in Minnesota is about 5.7 million. That means that that small minority took a large chunk of money from the majority of citizens in Minnesota. And you would expect Tim Walz to be angry. He should be outraged. And he should be taking some responsibility for what's happening within his state because he oversees everything that happens in that state. But what does he do instead of taking responsibility? Just blame President Trump just like everybody else does.
I think this idea that the Somali community is to blame for this because they didn't do more, I think that's how we got into this. And that's, again, I know we're not going to lose the whole plot here. All this work that's being done, Donald Trump brought this to the attention like this is something brand new. This is not brand new, and it's been being worked on. But he made it white hot and very dangerous.
So now Governor Walz is blaming President Trump for everything, just like everybody else does. He's blaming President Trump for bringing to the attention of the American people that there was a massive scandal happening in this country where millions of dollars, billions of dollars of American taxpayer money was going overseas to potentially fund terrorist organizations that seek to do this country harm. That's what he's blaming him for. But the media continues to pressure him on the situation. Listen to this great question he was asked.
Do you want to hear more from members and leaders from the Somali community to say, we need to look at ourselves, we need to hold our own neighbors accountable, because look at the damage that this has done to our community. What do you want to hear more from instead of just saying, don't blame us? Do you want to see more ownership and oversight from within?
Look, it's not law-abiding citizens. If that were the case, there's a lot of white men should be holding a lot of white men accountable for the crimes that they have committed.
So for those of you that are following along here, the reporter makes a great insinuation. What he's saying is the Somali community is a small community per se, right? 80,000. So that means that somebody within the community should have known that this whole thing was happening. And he's asking, shouldn't they be held accountable? Shouldn't they be policing themselves? Because you know for a fact that these people knew. There were people within the Somali community that knew that this scandal was happening, that this fraud was happening, and didn't say anything about it and didn't report it. And instead of saying, yes, the Somali community should be holding themselves accountable, what he does is he blames the white man?
Look, it's not law-abiding citizens. If that were the case, there's a lot of white men should be holding a lot of white men accountable for the crimes that they have committed.
Remember, the initial fraud that happened in Minnesota was $1 billion. And that $1 billion was only in Medicaid fraud. And then once they started digging into that, they found more fraud. And then when they investigated into that fraud, there was more fraud, which apparently the governor knew nothing about. Now, common sense will tell us that this massive scandal is not only happening in Minnesota. Because if you think that this is the only place it's happening, you're naive. You know it's happening all over the United States. Take a listen.
This recently uncovered effort to steal from all of you extends well beyond Minnesota's borders. Look at this. According to a FoxNews.com report, Minnesota is just the tip of the spear. An attorney from Ohio now sounding the alarm about a possible multi-billion-dollar Medicaid fraud scheme from members of the Somali community in that state.
So to use his own logic against him, since he's white, should he be holding himself accountable? Because that's what he just said, right? But I guess if you want to get away with fraud, with massive fraud that cost the American taxpayers billions of dollars, all you have to do is invoke racism. Listen to this.
Right. And to your point, will state leaders like Governor Tim Walz be held accountable? How much culpability do they have?
Yeah, as the New York Times put it, in 2020, the Minnesota Department of Education, they were noticing that they administered the children's meals programs, and they became overwhelmed by the number of applicants for feeding sites to feed children meals. And they began raising questions about the invoices they were getting. So the fraudulent group, Feeding Our Future, they threatened a lawsuit. They said, well, we're going to accuse you of racism, and it will be scrawled across the news. And so they backed off. A report from the nonpartisan Minnesota Office of Legislative Auditor looked at this. They later found that this threat of litigation and of negative press affected how state officials use their regulatory power. They simply backed off. They decided, one investigator said to the New York Times, The state's leaders were afraid that forcefully tackling this issue might cause political backlash. So yeah, they're going to have to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for the people of Minnesota, that means that the money they were paying in taxes was not even being used for the programs within the state. It was going abroad to support others. And now let's move on to our next subject, which is Venezuela. Now, Maria Corina Machado was in Oslo receiving her Nobel Peace Prize, and she was asked a great question. Are you returning to Venezuela now with Maduro, or are you going to wait till there's regime change before you go back? And this is what she said.
Are you going to return to a post-regime Venezuela or a Venezuela still under the regime? What do you think?
Only God knows that. What I can tell you is that Maduro's regime is in its final days. It will come to an end with or without negotiations. It is in Maduro's best interest for it to be through negotiations. At this point, he must be very clear about that. And there are probably actors who do not want him to do so or will not let him do so. We have asked the world to apply the full force of the law against a structure that is not a conventional dictatorship, but rather a narco-terrorist structure, which has finally been declared as such and sanctioned by the U.S. government. Criminal systems are supported by the flow of these illicit activities, which are not used for food, medicine, or the well-being of the people, but rather for weapons, to finance groups of destruction, espionage, persecution, and to expand their illicit activities.
Hence the reason why the oil tanker was seized. Now, that warrant for that tanker was signed months back, but this just adds to the pressure that's already being put on Maduro, because it takes millions of dollars out of the hands of terrorist organizations all over the world. And President Trump continues to escalate when it comes to the situation in Venezuela. Take a look.
All eyes right now on President Trump's next move, as he's been repeatedly threatening land attacks on Venezuela, and last night said the strikes would target, quote, horrible people that are bringing in drugs and killing our people. Now, just last week, Trump told me those land attacks could start very soon, even telling me they know every route, every house, and where the drugs are manufactured. All of this coming as Trump has been dramatically escalating pressure on Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro. This week, the U.S. seizing an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela and is now sanctioning 6 more Venezuelan tankers. That is a big deal, going after the country's oil because it's the regime's main source of revenue. And Maduro is now firing back, calling the seizure of the tanker kidnapping and robbery.
Those additional sanctions on those ships is huge, primarily because that means there's tens of millions of dollars that's going to be taken out of the hands of terrorist organizations, not just around the world, but the organizations within Venezuela as well. A lot of that money goes directly back into the military, because the military is a very important part of the illicit operations that are happening within Venezuela itself. That money being taken out of the Venezuelan military's hands means that their capabilities are going to be diminished. So when the opposition makes their move, they're going to be doing so against a weakened opponent. But the Venezuelan military is emboldened by Maduro's words.
They intend to wage war across Latin America and the Caribbean. And to the people of the United States, whom we hold in great respect, we say, they intend once again to return young taxpayers of North American society to their homes in coffins, in black bags, and in urns. From here, we continue to call for peace, not only for the people of Venezuela. We are clear that the idea of homeland extends far beyond Venezuelan borders. Let no one be mistaken about Venezuela. We have been seeing attempts to intimidate us by bringing aerial vectors of the United States Armed Forces close to our coasts. From here, with great humility, we tell them not to be mistaken about us. We are prepared to defend this country, and that will not intimidate us. We are not going to break because you are carrying out an aeronaval military deployment in the Caribbean, conducting offensive maneuvers near Venezuelan coasts. We only say from here that you should not be mistaken, because we have the capacity to react and to defend our airspace.
First of all, there's no aircraft in Venezuela that's going to be taking off or protecting the skies. I'm telling you that right now. We are going to neutralize those before the opposition engages in any type of combat operation. These same fighters that you see here are going to be the same fighters that you see running once the first Tomahawk hits the ground in Venezuela. Remember, this fight is going to be fought from within. The opposition is going to be the one that provides the ground forces to retake Venezuela. The Venezuelan people have to be the ones that take back their country, with the obvious assistance of the United States. I'm very confident that once Maduro is out of power, Maria Corina Machado is going to come back and they're going to do a great job of restoring Venezuela to greatness. All right, that brings us to the end. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, stay balanced.